Picture this: a peaceful afternoon in an upscale neighborhood. A young black girl, no older than 13, walks confidently through the park near her home. She's doing nothing unusual, just heading back from a friend's house, her headphones on and her heart light. But to one neighbor, something feels off. Before long, a call is made. Police cars pull up. Officers approach her, their questions sharp, their presence overwhelming. Her only crime? Existing in a space someone assumed she didn't belong. This story isn't just about a young girl facing unwarranted scrutiny. It's about the dangerous assumptions that fuel moments like these and the powerful reckoning that follows. Because what happens next will leave you in awe. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story of racism. It's a story of resilience, empowerment, and a stunning reversal of roles that no one saw coming. In a quiet, gated community where every lawn is manicured, every car gleams, and every face seems to blend into a singular image of privilege, a 13-year-old girl named Nia stood out. Not because of anything she did, but simply because of who she was. A bright, confident black girl raised to walk with her head held high, even in spaces that seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here." Nia was no stranger to this neighborhood. It was her home. Her mom, Tanya, a trailblazing real estate developer, had worked tirelessly to build the life they now lived. She wasn't just a resident. She was the one who had envisioned and created this estate. And Tanya had instilled in Nia a deep sense of pride, a belief that she deserved to take up space anywhere she chose. But on this particular afternoon, as Nia walked home from her friend's house, taking a familiar shortcut through the park, the world around her shifted. The warm sun on her face was suddenly overshadowed by a gaze, an uninvited, piercing stare from the other side of a window. Karen, a white woman who had recently moved into the neighborhood, watched Nia closely. She didn't know her. She didn't care to ask. All Karen saw was a young black girl in a neighborhood she assumed could never be hers. And in Karen's mind, that was enough to justify action. The phone call was swift. Her voice carried a mix of urgency and accusation as she reported a suspicious individual in the park. Karen didn't ask questions. She made assumptions. And with that single act, she set events into motion that no one could have predicted. Minutes later, the tranquility of the neighborhood was shattered. 2 police cars pulled into the estate, their lights flashing, a jarring contrast to the quiet streets. Nia, caught off guard, froze as the officers approached. Imagine being 13 years old, standing in the park you played in countless times, suddenly surrounded by uniformed officers asking, "What are you doing here?" Confusion washed over Nia's face. She stammered, "I live here. I'm just walking home." But Karen was already there, standing at a distance, her arms crossed, her expression rigid with suspicion. "She's lying," Karen said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. "I've never seen her before. She doesn't belong here." The officers hesitated. They weren't sure what to believe, but the weight of Karen's words pressed on them, urging them to question Nia further. They asked for proof that a child belonged in her own neighborhood. Across town, Tanya was in the middle of a meeting when her phone buzzed. A call from the police. Her heart sank as the words hit her like a wave. "Your daughter is being questioned in the park. We need you to come immediately." Tanya didn't hesitate. She grabbed her keys, her mind racing. She knew this wasn't just about her daughter taking a shortcut. This was about something far deeper, something she had spent her entire life fighting against. As Tanya's car sped toward the park, the situation grew more intense. Karen demanded answers. The officers waited uneasily. And Nia? She stood there, clutching her backpack, wondering why she had to prove her right to simply exist. But what Karen didn't know, what no one expected, was that Tanya wasn't just any mother rushing to defend her child. She was a woman who owned the very ground Karen was standing on. And when Tanya arrived, the dynamic of this entire encounter would shift in a way no one saw coming. The air was thick with tension as a sleek black luxury car pulled up to the scene, its engine humming like a storm about to break. Tanya stepped out, her presence commanding attention. Dressed impeccably, her eyes scanned the situation. Her daughter, confused and scared, flanked by officers, and Karen standing smugly to the side, convinced she had done the right thing. Tanya didn't rush. She walked toward them with a deliberate calm, each step echoing authority. She stopped directly in front of the officers, her voice steady but firm. "What is going on here? And why is my daughter being harassed in her own neighborhood?" Karen scoffed, crossing her arms. "Your daughter? She doesn't live here. She can't live here." She was cutting through the park, trespassing. Tanya's gaze shifted to Karen, her expression unwavering. "Doesn't live here? Let me make something clear. I am Tanya Lewis and I own this estate. I developed it. I live here, and so does my daughter." Karen's face fell. The confidence drained from her posture as the weight of Tanya's words hit her. She stammered, "You own this place?" Tanya didn't let up. "Yes, I do. I designed these homes. I approved the plans for this park. And I am the president of the HOA." She turned to the officers. "And you're telling me that despite all of that, my child, my 13-year-old daughter, has to prove her right to be here because this woman couldn't imagine that a black family could live in this neighborhood?" By now, curious neighbors had gathered, drawn by the commotion. They whispered among themselves, their faces a mix of shock and shame. Many of them knew Tanya, not just as a resident, but as the visionary behind their community. And yet they realized they had allowed someone like Karen to bring her biases into their midst unchecked. An older man stepped forward, his face apologetic. "Tanya, I'm so sorry. This is unacceptable. Karen doesn't speak for the rest of us." Another neighbor chimed in. "We've been so proud of what you've done here. This isn't right." Karen, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to justify herself. I didn't mean anything by it. I thought." Tanya cut her off, her voice sharp but measured. "You thought my daughter didn't belong. That's the problem. You didn't ask. You assumed. And that assumption could have escalated into something far worse." Tanya turned to the police, her voice firm. "You're part of this too. You didn't verify her identity before you showed up ready to question her. How many times has this happened to kids who look like mine, in neighborhoods like this?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them cleared his throat and apologized. "You're right, ma'am. We should have handled this differently. We're sorry for the distress we caused you and your daughter." But Tanya wasn't done. She addressed the growing crowd. "This isn't just about my family. It's about how easily prejudice can slip into our everyday lives, even in places we think are safe. Karen's actions could have put my daughter's life at risk, and if we don't confront these biases head-on, it's only a matter of time before it happens again." The neighbors nodded solemnly, some murmuring agreements. A younger woman spoke up. "I've seen things like this before, but I didn't know how to address it. Thank you for speaking up, Tanya." Tanya looked at Nia, her voice softening but still strong. "We belong here. You belong here. Never let anyone make you feel otherwise." She turned back to Karen. "And if you can't handle living in a diverse community, then maybe you don't belong here." Karen, humiliated, quietly slipped away, leaving Tanya and Nia surrounded by supportive neighbors. The officers, chastened, offered their final apologies before leaving the scene. Tanya had not only defended her daughter, but sparked a moment of reckoning that the entire community wouldn't soon forget. The confrontation was over, but the impact was only beginning. Karen, once standing so sure of herself, was now left to reckon with her actions. Tanya, calm yet unyielding, looked her directly in the eyes and said, "You have two choices. You can either publicly apologize and commit to anti-racism training, or I'll file a formal complaint with the HOA. Either way, this stops here." Karen hesitated, her face a blend of shame and defiance. Apologizing wasn't easy for someone used to feeling right, but as the weight of the moment pressed on her, surrounded by neighbors who now saw her clearly, she knew there was no escaping accountability. With a reluctant nod, Karen agreed, and while Tanya accepted her apology, she made it clear words were not enough. Change had to follow. But for Tanya, this wasn't just about Karen. It was about the neighborhood, the unspoken biases that allowed incidents like this to happen, and the silence that perpetuated them. She decided it was time to turn this moment of pain into a powerful movement for change. Days later, Tanya organized a community meeting, a gathering that would spark conversations many had been avoiding for years. The event was held at the estate's community center, a building Tanya herself had designed. Residents filled the room, unsure of what to expect, but aware that something important was about to unfold. Tanya stood at the front of the room, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She shared her journey, the struggles of being a black woman in a predominantly white industry, the challenges of breaking into spaces that weren't built for her, and the triumph of creating a community where her daughter could grow up safe and proud. But, she said, pausing to let the words sink in, incidents like what happened with Nia show me we still have work to do. My dream was to build a neighborhood where everyone feels welcome. Yet here we are, questioning the presence of a child, my child, because of the color of her skin. That is not the community I envisioned, and I refuse to let that vision crumble. Tanya's words resonated deeply. Neighbors began to share their own experiences, some of prejudice they had witnessed, others of bias they hadn't realized they were carrying. It was uncomfortable but necessary. Tanya then proposed a partnership with local organizations to host workshops on diversity, inclusion, and allyship. The room agreed unanimously. Through it all, Nia watched her mother with admiration. She had seen Tanya face challenges before, but this was different. It wasn't just about business. It was about identity, belonging, and standing tall in the face of ignorance. Later that evening, Tanya sat with Nia and spoke the words that would stay with her forever. Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong, Nia. You own your space, not because of what you have, but because of who you are. Always remember that. As the weeks passed, the neighborhood began to change. The workshops opened eyes and hearts, sparking new friendships and a deeper understanding of what it meant to live in true community. Karen attended every session, quietly taking notes, her earlier arrogance replaced with humility. The incident, once a painful moment of division, became a catalyst for growth. The estate Tanya had built now stood as more than just a collection of beautiful homes. It became a beacon of resilience, accountability, and the power of change. And for Nia, the lesson was clear. No matter the assumptions others might make, she belonged. Not just in her neighborhood, but in any space she chose to walk into. Because, as her mother had shown her, strength isn't just in standing tall, it's in rising above. This story began with something so familiar. It's almost insidious. A moment of suspicion, a snapped judgment, a call made in the name of safety. But beneath it lay a much deeper issue, the unconscious biases that shape how we see and treat one another. What happened to Nia wasn't just about one woman's prejudice. It was about a system of assumptions, a culture that allows those assumptions to go unchecked. But this story didn't end there. It became something more, a moment of accountability, of courage, and a profound change. Tanya didn't just defend her daughter that day. She stood as a reminder that resilience isn't just about weathering the storm. It's about challenging the very winds that blow against you. Her calm strength turned a painful encounter into a teachable moment for everyone involved, from the neighbors to the police, and yes, even Karen. This story reminds us that racism isn't always loud or obvious. Often, it's in the smallest actions. The assumptions made about who belongs, the questions asked of some but not others, the decisions shaped by a prejudice we refuse to acknowledge. But as Tanya showed us, those moments don't have to end in silence. They can spark change. For Nia, this was a lesson in resilience. For the neighborhood, it was a lesson in accountability. And for all of us watching, it's a reminder that change begins with confronting bias, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. What would you have done if you were in Tanya's shoes? Would you have had the strength to turn anger into action, fear into power, and division into unity? Let us know in the comments below. Because stories like Tanya and Nia's aren't just tales of injustice, they're blueprints for hope. Thank you for watching to this point. Make sure to hit the subscribe button to have easy access to more insightful stories like this. Thank you.